I never thought that Monday would be the moment I'd have to choose between my dignity and my fear. But when he slid that recording across the table toward me, I just smiled. I knew I wouldn't be the one walking away. Not when I held the keys to every skeleton in his closet. Every dirty deal he'd made in those drunken conference calls he thought no one heard. This wasn't about a pay cut anymore. This was war. My name is Natalie Brooks, and for 9 years, I've been the backbone of crisis management at Valcrest Strategies, one of Denver's most prestigious PR firms. At 38, I've handled everything from corporate scandals to celebrity meltdowns, turning potential disasters into mere footnotes. My clients trusted me with their darkest moments, and I never let them down. Until that Monday morning, when I realized I'd been so busy protecting everyone else, I'd failed to see the target on my own back. The shift started 6 months ago, when Darren Cole arrived. Fresh from a competitor firm in New York, he swept in with his tailored suits and Harvard MBA, promising to revolutionize our approach to modern PR. The board ate it up. Within weeks, he'd restructured entire departments, brought in his own people, all suspiciously young and suspiciously eager to please, and began what he called performance optimization. I watched as colleagues with decades of experience were suddenly deemed redundant. The pattern was clear. Anyone over 35, anyone with a salary that reflected their expertise, anyone who might challenge his vision. They all found themselves marginalized. Their projects reassigned to his hand-picked team of 20-somethings who'd nod at his every word. At first, I thought I was safe. My client list read like a Fortune 500 directory. My crisis management strategies had saved millions in potential damages. Just last quarter, I'd navigated a pharmaceutical giant through a recall that could have destroyed them. Instead, we emerged with their reputation intact and stock prices steady. But then the signs started. My proposals began coming back with red ink, not corrections, just dismissals. "Let's go in a different direction," Darren would say, sliding my work across the conference table like it was contaminated. Projects I'd cultivated for years were suddenly assigned to Ashley or Brandon or whatever fresh-faced graduate he'd hired that week. In meetings, he'd talk over me, his voice cutting through mine as if I were merely background noise. "We need fresh perspectives," he'd announce, his gray eyes never quite meeting mine. "The industry's evolving. We can't afford to be stuck in old paradigms." Old paradigms. That's what my experience had become. My proven strategies, my institutional knowledge, my relationships built over nearly a decade, all reduced to old paradigms. The isolation was deliberate, surgical. Lunch invitations stopped coming. My office, once a hub of collaboration, became a ghost town. Even my assistant, Janet, who'd worked with me for 5 years, was reassigned without explanation. When I'd confronted Darren about it, he'd simply smiled that practice smile of his. "Resource allocation," he'd said. "We need to ensure our support staff are working with high-priority accounts." The message was clear. I was no longer high priority. I was a line item on a budget he was eager to slash. The summons came at 4:47 p.m. on a Friday. Darren's assistant, one of his New York imports, appeared at my door with that rehearsed sympathy they must teach in business school. "Mr. Cole would like to see you in conference room C. Private meeting, no HR." The writing wasn't just on the wall, it was in neon lights. Conference room C was our smallest meeting space, tucked away from the main floor, the kind of room where uncomfortable conversations happened, where careers went to die. I gathered my notebook, old habit, and walked the hallway I'd walked 1,000 times, my heels clicking against marble that suddenly felt like a countdown. Darren sat at the far end of the table, his back to the window, afternoon light creating a halo effect around his silver hair. Power positioning 101. A manila folder lay closed in front of him, his manicured fingers drumming a rhythm on its surface. "Natalie," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him, not beside him, where colleagues sit, across, where adversaries face off. "Thank you for coming." As if I had a choice. I sat, spine straight, and waited. In crisis management, The first rule is simple. Let them speak first. Let them reveal their position. He opened with pleasantries, the weather, the upcoming holiday weekend. Each word a careful step toward the cliff he was about to push me off. Then, with the casual cruelty of someone who's done this before, he slid the folder across the table. The company is restructuring, he began, his voice adopting that corporate compassion that feels like sandpaper on skin. We're having to make some difficult decisions about resource allocation and salary optimization. I didn't touch the folder. And I'm a resource that needs optimizing? A flicker of surprise crossed his face. He'd expected tears, perhaps begging. He didn't know that I'd guided CEOs through federal investigations, that I'd sat across from prosecutors and journalists and angry shareholders. A middle manager with a Napoleon complex didn't intimidate me. Your current compensation package is unsustainable, he continued, recovering his script. However, we value your institutional knowledge. We'd like to offer you the opportunity to remain with Valcrest at an adjusted rate. Adjusted. I let the word hang between us. How adjusted are we talking? He pushed the folder closer. 50% reduction, same responsibilities, of course. We all have to make sacrifices for the company's future. I finally opened the folder. The numbers stared back at me, insulting in its precision. They'd calculated exactly how much they thought my desperation was worth. This is what you value 9 years of dedicated service. I kept my voice level, professional. Another crisis to manage, another fire to control. Darren leaned back, his confidence growing. It's more than fair, considering the alternative. The job market is challenging for someone at your career stage. This industry values innovation. Fresh perspectives. He paused, selecting his words like weapons. At a different phase of your professional journey. You mean I'm old? I mean, you're expensive. His mask slipped for just a moment, revealing the satisfaction underneath. Look, Natalie. I'm trying to help you here. Take the weekend, think about it. But understand that if you choose not to accept this generous offer, we'll have to part ways. And at your level, well, references matter. Future employers will want to know why you left. The threat hung between us like a blade. Take the pay cut or leave with your reputation in question. Submit or be destroyed. I closed the folder slowly, deliberately. Then I smiled, not the polished PR smile I'd perfected over the years, but something genuine, something that made him shift in his seat. You know what, Darren? You're right, I should take the weekend to think about this. I stood, smoothing my skirt. I should consider all my options. Review all my resources. Something in my tone made him frown. Your resources? Oh, connections, information, the kinds of things you accumulate over 9 years. I picked up the folder, holding it like evidence. It's amazing what you overhear at company events, isn't it? Especially when people think you're just part of the furniture. His drumming fingers stilled. I'll give you my answer Monday, I said, heading for the door. Then I paused, my hand on the handle. Oh, and Darren, you might want to be careful about those late-night calls you make from company phones. You never know who might be documenting expenses. I left him sitting there, his face a careful mask that couldn't quite hide the calculation happening behind his eyes. He was wondering what I knew, what I'd heard, what I might have saved. Good. Let him wonder. He'd just declared war on the wrong woman. I drove home that evening with memories flooding back like evidence in a cold case suddenly warming up. 2 years ago, at the Denver Marketing Alliance Gala, our industry's premier networking event, I'd witnessed Darren's true nature when he thought no one important was watching. The ballroom at the Four Seasons had been packed with the city's marketing elite, champagne flowing as freely as business cards. I'd stepped out onto the terrace for air, exhausted from hours of strategic mingling, when I heard his voice drifting from the alcove near the service entrance, drunk, sloppy, careless. Fucking genius, Brett! He was slurring into his phone. Shell company's been operational for 6 months. Phantom PR campaigns that never happen. Invoices that look completely legitimate. Monica's handling the accounts. Yeah. The ex from Chicago. She gets 30%. I pocket the rest. I'd frozen behind the column, my PR instinct screaming at me to document everything, using my phone. I'd recorded the next 3 minutes of his conversation, him bragging about $50,000 monthly invoices for crisis management services that didn't exist, about how easy it was to hide the transactions among legitimate vendor payments. The beauty is, he'd laughed, that harsh sound I'd come to know so well. These corporate idiots are so focused on looking for external threats, they never check internal bleeding. As long as the board sees growth, they don't question the details. That recording still lived in my cloud storage, backed up in 3 different places. An insurance policy I'd never thought I'd need to cash. But that wasn't all. 6 months later, I'd been working late, back when I still had access to the executive floor, and needed approval signatures for an urgent client matter. Darren's office door had been ajar, his computer screen visible from the hallway. What I saw made me stop cold. An email thread about Project Phantom, complete with fabricated client testimonials and budget allocations for campaigns that existed only on paper. I'd done what any strategic thinker would do. Taken photos, quick, silent, decisive. The timestamps, the routing numbers, the signatures, all captured in high resolution on my personal device. Then there was the Vivian situation. Sweet Vivian Chen. Our intern from USC, barely 22 and eager to learn. I'd been her mentor, watching her grow from nervous newcomer to confident contributor. Until the night she'd shown up at my apartment, makeup smeared, hands shaking. He said it was just drinks to discuss my future at the company, she'd whispered, clutching the mug of tea I'd made her. Said I had potential but needed to be more flexible about networking. When I tried to leave, he grabbed my wrist. Said opportunities like Valcrest don't come along often for girls without connections. I'd held her while she cried, then helped her document everything. The texts he'd sent, increasingly inappropriate. The private mentoring sessions he'd suggested. The way he'd cornered her in the supply room. Pressing too close. Breathing promises and threats in equal measure. Vivian had left Valcrest quietly. Darren had made sure of that. Threatening her with industry blacklisting if she made trouble. But she'd taken my advice and kept everything. Every message, every incident report I'd helped her write and timestamp. She was freelancing now, successful despite his attempts to diminish her. But the evidence remained. As I pulled into my garage that Friday night, I realized I'd been unconsciously collecting proof of Darren Cole's corruption for 2 years. Not deliberately. Not with any plan, just the instincts of someone who'd spent a career recognizing when something didn't smell right. My laptop sat on my kitchen counter where I'd left it that morning, back when I'd still believed I had a future at Valcrest. Now, it felt like a weapon waiting to be loaded. I poured myself a glass of wine, the good stuff, because if ever there was a night for it, and began to catalog my arsenal. The recordings, the photos, Vivian's documentation. Email threads I'd BCC'd myself on for reference that showed pattern after pattern of questionable decisions. Financial authorizations that didn't match actual deliverables. Vendor contracts with companies that existed only as post office boxes and website templates. Darren Cole thought he was playing chess while everyone else played checkers. He didn't realize I'd been watching the board all along, noting every illegal move, every vulnerability. He'd just made the mistake of threatening someone who knew exactly where he'd hidden his pawns. Saturday morning found me at a coffee shop in Lodo, far from Valcrest's sphere of influence. Marcus Williams sat across from me, his internal auditor's eyes already sharp despite the early hour. We'd worked together for 3 years before he'd moved to our strategic partner firm. And more importantly, I'd helped his daughter get into Columbia's journalism program when Darren had tried to sabotage her recommendation letters. "You look like someone planning a revolution," Marcus said, stirring his black coffee. "More like a revelation." I slid a flash drive across the table. I need your expertise, but first, I need your word. This stays between us until I say otherwise. He pocketed the drive without touching it with his fingers, old habits from his forensic accounting days. I've been tracking irregularities in the Valcrest accounts for months. My boss keeps asking why their invoices don't match their deliverables. How deep have you looked? Deep enough to know someone's running a sophisticated embezzlement scheme. Not deep enough to prove who. His eyes narrowed. Until now. I'm guessing. I spent the next hour walking him through what I knew, watching his expression shift from interest to alarm to something that looked like righteous anger. Marcus had daughters, 3 of them. The Vivian story hit him particularly hard. Give me 48 hours, he said finally. I'll cross-reference what you've given me with our internal audits. If even half of this checks out, we're talking about federal crimes. Wire fraud, embezzlement, sexual harassment, creating hostile work environment. I don't want to destroy the company, I clarified. Just remove the cancer. Sometimes that requires aggressive surgery. He stood, then paused. He'll come after you when he realizes what's happening. I'm counting on it. My next meeting was harder. Vivian, now going by her middle name, Grace, professionally, agreed to meet me at her apartment in Capitol Hill. The confident freelance strategist who answered the door was a far cry from the shattered intern I'd comforted 18 months ago. I knew this day would come, she said, leading me to her home office. I've been preparing. The walls were covered with her client wins, awards from industry organizations, proof that Darren's attempts to blacklist her had failed. But in her desk drawer, locked and organized, was a file that made my breath catch. After I left, 4 other women reached out to me, she explained, spreading documents across her desk. Former employees, interns, even a vendor representative. All with similar stories. All too scared to speak up alone. She'd built a careful network, documenting patterns of behavior that spanned years and multiple companies. Darren's time at Valcrest was just the latest chapter in a longer story of abuse of power. I've been waiting for someone with enough standing to make people listen, she said. Someone he couldn't dismiss as a disgruntled junior employee. What about legal action? My lawyer says we have a strong case, but... She gestured to her thriving workspace. I rebuilt my life. I wasn't sure I wanted to tear it down again for justice, but if you're taking him down anyway. We spent the afternoon creating affidavits, organizing evidence, building a case that would be impossible to ignore. Grace had developed a steel spine beneath her soft-spoken exterior, and her documentation was meticulous. Dates, times, witnesses, contemporaneous notes she'd made after each incident. By Sunday evening, I had transformed my home office into a war room. Financial evidence occupied one wall. Harassment documentation another. Marcus had sent preliminary findings that made my stomach turn. The embezzlement went deeper than even I'd suspected, with connections to Darren's previous employers that suggested a career-long pattern. I also reached out to 3 board members I'd worked with over the years, sending carefully worded emails about urgent concerns regarding financial irregularities that would land in their inboxes Monday morning, just enough to ensure they'd be paying attention when the real revelations began. Monday was coming, and with it, Darren's expectation of my surrender. He thought he'd given me a weekend to contemplate my professional mortality, to realize how powerless I was against his corporate machinery. Instead, I'd spent it loading weapons he didn't even know existed. He wanted me to take a 50% pay cut or leave. Fine. But I wouldn't be the only one making an exit. The game board was set. Now I just had to play it perfectly. Monday morning arrived with storm clouds that matched the atmosphere at Valcrest. I walked through the lobby at my usual time, noting how conversations stopped as I passed. Word had clearly spread about Friday's meeting. The vultures were circling, waiting to see if I'd survive or become another casualty of Darren's regime. The first sign something was wrong came at 9:15. 3 major clients had pulled their contracts over the weekend, citing concerns about financial transparency. The emails had been copied to the board. Darren's assistant rushed past my office, her face pale, heading for his corner suite. By 10 a.m., an anonymous blog post titled, "The PR Firm That Can't Manage Its Own Crisis," was trending in industry circles. Without naming names, it raised questions about Valcrest's vendor payments and described a culture of harassment that went unchecked. The details were vague enough to avoid libel, but specific enough to make every employee look sideways at management. I kept my head down, working on client reports as if nothing had changed. When colleagues asked if I was okay, I gave them sad smiles and phrases like, "just trying to stay positive," and focusing on what I can control. Let them think I was beaten, defeated, harmless. The emergency all-hands meeting came at 2 p.m. Darren stood at the podium, his usual swagger replaced by barely controlled fury. The vein in his temple throbbed as he spoke about malicious rumors and competitors trying to destabilize us. "If anyone in this room has been spreading false information about this company," he said, his eyes scanning the crowd but lingering on me, "understand that we will pursue every legal avenue available: defamation, breach of contract, criminal prosecution if warranted." I met his gaze steadily, my expression neutral. Around me, employees shifted nervously. They could smell blood in the water, but didn't know whose. "Furthermore," he continued, "effective immediately, all external communications must be approved by my office. Any contact with media, clients, or industry partners without explicit permission will be grounds for immediate termination." Classic panic move. Lock down communications when you're losing control of the narrative. I'd advised against it dozens of times with clients. It never worked. It only made people more curious about what you were trying to hide. After the meeting, he summoned me to his office. This time, he didn't bother with the conference room pretense. He wanted me on his territory. "Quite a coincidence," he said without preamble, "that all this starts happening right after our conversation. Is it?" I sat without being invited. "I've been home all weekend, thinking about your generous offer. Though I did hear from some former colleagues, the industry is smaller than we think." "Cut the bullshit, Natalie." His mask had dropped completely now. "I know this is you. The blog post had details only an insider would know." "Details about financial irregularities?" I tilted my head. "That's concerning. Have you notified the board?" His jaw clenched. "You think you're clever, but you're forgetting who holds the power here. I can make sure you never work in this industry again." "Like you tried with Vivian." The name hit him like a physical blow. He actually stepped back. "Oh, did you think she disappeared quietly?" I continued, my voice conversational. "She's doing quite well, actually. Just landed the Morrison Group account. Turns out, when people hear how she was treated here, they're eager to give her opportunities." "You're playing a dangerous game." "Am I? I'm just sitting here, considering whether a 50% pay cut is worth staying at a company that apparently has such serious financial and cultural issues." I stood, smoothing my skirt. "By the way, Marcus Williams from Brennan Associates called me this weekend. Strange questions about invoice discrepancies. You might want to prepare for that audit." His face had gone from red to pale. "You contacted our partners?" "Marcus is an old friend. We catch up sometimes." I moved toward the door. "But don't worry, Darren. I'm sure someone with your attention to detail has nothing to hide. All those vendor contracts, those PR campaigns. I'm certain they'll stand up to scrutiny." "Get out." His voice was low, dangerous. "And if you're smart, you'll take the deal. Because otherwise..." I turned at the door. "Otherwise what? You'll destroy my career, make sure I can't feed my family, use your power to crush someone who's given this company everything?" I smiled. "Go ahead. Add it to the list." Tuesday morning arrived with unusual activity in the executive parking garage. A black town car sat in the space reserved for board visits, and security guards clustered near the elevators. I arrived at my usual time, coffee in hand, playing the part of the dedicated employee unaware of the storm about to break. The summons came at 9:30 sharp, not from Darren, but from his assistant, her voice trembling. "The board is requesting your presence in the main conference room, immediately." The main conference room was our showpiece, all glass and chrome with views of the Rockies. Today, it felt like a courtroom. At the head of the table sat Constance Evans, the parent company's CEO, a woman whose reputation for surgical precision in handling corporate crises was legendary. Flanking her were two board members I'd emailed Sunday night and someone I didn't recognize, likely legal counsel. Darren sat at the far end, his attorney beside him. His usual polish was gone, replaced by the haunted look of someone who'd spent the night reviewing evidence against them. "Ms. Brooks," Constance began, her voice crisp as Denver morning air. "Thank you for joining us. We have some questions about documents that were provided to the board regarding financial irregularities." "I'm happy to help however I can," I replied, taking the seat she indicated, notably on the board's side of the table, not Darren's. What followed was a masterclass in corporate interrogation. Constance had clearly done her homework, aided by Marcus's preliminary audit findings. She projected spreadsheets onto the wall, phantom invoices, shell company payments, a clear pattern of embezzlement spanning 2 years. "Mr. Cole," she said, never taking her eyes off the screen. "Can you explain why Pinnacle Marketing Solutions, a company registered to your former partner Monica Reeves, received $1.2 million for PR campaigns that our audit can find no evidence of?" Darren's attorney whispered urgently in his ear. "My client needs time to review these allegations." "Your client has had since yesterday morning when we received the initial report." Constance cut him off. She clicked to the next slide, the email threads I'd photographed. These communications seem quite clear about the nature of Project Phantom. I sat silent, professional, letting the evidence speak for itself. This wasn't my show anymore. I'd simply lit the fuse. Then Constance played her ace. "We've also received disturbing reports about systematic harassment within the organization." She clicked again, and Vivian's face appeared on screen, a professional headshot from her new company. "Ms. Grace, formerly Vivian of our intern program, has provided a sworn affidavit detailing inappropriate behavior. She's also connected us with 4 other women with similar experiences." Darren's face had progressed from pale to ashen. "These are disgruntled former employees, including a current vendor representative who filed a formal complaint yesterday." Constance's voice could have frozen hell. "Mr. Cole, the evidence before us suggests a pattern of embezzlement, fraud, and creation of a hostile work environment that opens this company to significant legal liability." She turned to me then. "Ms. Brooks, we understand Mr. Cole recently proposed significant changes to your compensation." "A 50% reduction," I confirmed. "He suggested it was that or termination. Despite your exemplary performance record and client retention rate, he felt I was no longer aligned with the company's direction." A board member I'd worked with for years, Harold Morrison, spoke for the first time. "Natalie has been instrumental in maintaining our reputation through multiple crises. The idea that she's somehow expendable while this," he gestured at the evidence on screen, "was happening under our noses is absurd." Constance stood, her decision clearly made. "Mr. Cole, effective immediately, you are suspended pending a full investigation. Security will escort you to collect your personal items. Your company devices and access have already been disabled." Darren shot to his feet. "You can't. This is a setup. She orchestrated this." "Ms. Brooks," Constance continued as if he hadn't spoken, "provided documentation of irregularities she observed, as any ethical employee should. The investigation will determine the full extent of wrongdoing." Security entered as if on cue. Darren's attorney was already packing up, distancing himself from a sinking ship. As they led him out, Darren turned to me, his face twisted with rage. "You think you've won? You've just destroyed your own career. No one will trust a snitch." I met his gaze calmly. "I reported illegal activity that was harming our company and our people. If that makes me untrustworthy in your circles, I'll consider it a badge of honor." The door closed behind him with a definitive click. The king had fallen, and he'd done it to himself. The aftermath of Darren's removal unfolded with the swift efficiency of a well-managed crisis. Ironic, given that crisis management had been my specialty. Within hours, a forensic accounting team had taken over his office. And by Wednesday, the full scope of his embezzlement was becoming clear. $2.3 million siphoned over 2 years through fake vendors and phantom campaigns. Constance Evans called me into her temporary office Thursday afternoon. The storm clouds had cleared, and sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across financial reports that detailed Darren's systematic theft. "Natalie," she began, setting aside her reading glasses, "we owe you a debt of gratitude. Your documentation was instrumental in uncovering this cancer." "I did what anyone in my position should have done," I replied, though we both knew that wasn't true. Plenty of people had seen signs and stayed silent. "Which is why I want to offer you the position of Senior Vice President of Strategic Communications. It comes with a 40% salary increase and a seat on the executive committee." She slid a contract across the desk. "We need someone with your integrity helping to guide this company forward." I looked at the contract, everything I'd worked toward for 9 years, delivered on a silver platter born from someone else's downfall. The number was impressive. The power was real. 3 weeks ago, I would have signed without hesitation. "That's a generous offer," I said slowly, "but I need to decline." Surprise flickered across her usually composed features. "May I ask why?" "Because Valcrest needs to heal. And I'll always be associated with this scandal, even as the whistleblower. Every meeting, every decision, people will wonder what I know about them, what I'm documenting." I pushed the contract back. "Besides, I've realized something these past few days. I've spent so long managing other people's crises that I've ignored my own dreams." "Which are?" "I'm starting a nonprofit, an organization that provides legal and professional support for employees facing workplace harassment and retaliation. A place where people like Vivian, Grace, don't have to suffer in silence or sacrifice their careers for speaking truth." Constance studied me for a long moment. "We'd be interested in being a founding sponsor. Quietly, of course." "Of course." As I packed my office that afternoon, colleagues stopped by, some to thank me, others just to witness the end of an era. Janet, my former assistant, hugged me with tears in her eyes. "You saved us," she whispered. He was planning to cut half the staff after the holidays, replace everyone with his people from New York. The information didn't surprise me. Darren's kind always had bigger plans than simple embezzlement. He'd wanted to remake Valcrest in his image, and I'd just been the first obstacle to remove. By Friday, the media had picked up the story. Major PR firm executive arrested for embezzlement ran in the Denver Post, with carefully worded statements from Valcrest about their commitment to transparency and ethical business practices. My name was kept out of it, though industry insiders knew. They always know. Grace called that evening as I was packing up my home office. "I heard about your nonprofit idea. I want in. Not just as a success story, but as a partner. I've been building a network of survivors. We're ready to make real change." Marcus texted shortly after. "Federal prosecutors are taking the case. With the evidence you provided, he's looking at 15 to 20 years. Also, my firm wants to provide pro bono financial auditing for your nonprofit. Consider it done." Monday morning, exactly 1 week after Darren's ultimatum, I stood in my new office space in Lodo. It was smaller than my Valcrest corner office, with second-hand furniture and walls that needed paint. But it was mine, built on truth rather than fear. The phone was already ringing. A woman from a tech startup, afraid to report her CEO's advances. A group of employees from a restaurant chain, documenting wage theft. People who'd heard whispers about what I'd done and wanted to know if someone would finally listen. I thought about Darren, probably meeting with prosecutors right now, trying to negotiate a deal. He'd threatened to destroy my career, to ensure I'd never work in the industry again. He was half right. I'd never work in that industry again. Not because I couldn't, but because I'd found something better. I'd discovered that sometimes the best revenge isn't just survival, it's transformation. The sign painter would arrive tomorrow. The Phoenix Foundation, rising from corporate ashes. It seemed fitting. 6 months later, I stood before an audience of 200 at the Denver Convention Center. The Ethics and Power in Corporate America conference had invited me as their keynote speaker. Though the woman introducing me bore little resemblance to the corporate warrior who'd walked Valcrest's halls. Please welcome Natalie Brooks, founder of the Phoenix Foundation and author of the upcoming book, Silent No More, A Guide to Workplace Justice. The applause was warm, genuine. In the front row sat Grace, now my co-director, and Marcus, who served on our board. Behind them, dozens of faces I'd come to know. Survivors who'd found their voices, employees who'd reclaimed their power, whistleblowers who'd chosen truth over comfort. 2 years ago, I began. A man looked me in the eye and told me I was worth half my value. He thought he was talking about money. What he didn't understand was that he was really talking about my worth as a human being, my contributions, my integrity. He offered me a choice: accept my diminishment or lose everything. I paused, scanning the room. I chose a third option. I chose truth. The presentation chronicled not just my story, but the pattern it represented: how workplace abuse thrives in silence, how financial crimes hide behind corporate hierarchies, how the phrase, "that's just how things are," enables predators and thieves to flourish. Darren Cole was sentenced last month to 18 years in federal prison. I continued. But this isn't a story about one bad actor. It's about systems that protect bad actors until someone decides enough is enough. The Phoenix Foundation had handled over 300 cases in 6 months. We'd recovered $4.2 million in stolen wages, supported 27 harassment victims through legal proceedings, and helped dozens of whistleblowers navigate the treacherous path of speaking truth to power. Our team had grown from just Grace and me to 15 full-time staff and a network of pro bono professionals. People ask me if I regret leaving Valcrest, if I miss the prestige, the corner office, the six-figure safety net. I said, what I tell them is this: I traded managing crises for preventing them. I exchanged protecting reputations for protecting people. And yes, my office is smaller now, but my impact is infinitely larger. After the speech, a young woman approached, clutching a folder. Her story was familiar: a boss who'd made her uncomfortable, HR that looked the other way, the implied threat that speaking up meant career suicide. I recorded some conversations, she whispered, glancing around nervously. But I'm scared. He knows everyone in the industry. I handed her my card, the simple design a far cry from Valcrest's embossed corporate stationery. That's what they want you to believe, that they're too powerful, too connected, too important to challenge. But here's what I learned. Their power is built on our silence. Break the silence and watch how quickly that power crumbles. Later that evening, as I locked up the Phoenix Foundation office, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it. We got our share of threats and harassment, but something made me read it. Ms. Brooks, you probably don't remember me. I was one of the junior accounts at Valcrest who Darren was planning to fire. Because of what you did, I kept my job and got promoted. I just wanted you to know that every time I face something wrong at work now, I ask myself, what would Natalie do? Thank you for showing us that standing up is possible. I smiled, tucking the phone away. Outside, Denver's skyline glittered in the twilight, each building housing its own stories of power and politics, triumphs and abuses. Somewhere in those towers, someone was facing their own Darren Cole moment, that impossible choice between dignity and survival. My journey had started with a threat disguised as a choice: take a 50% pay cut or leave. I'd found a third way, one paved with documented truth and quiet courage. The man who'd thought he owned my future had forgotten that secrets have a way of surfacing, especially when you push the wrong person too far. The Phoenix Foundation's logo glowed softly in our window, a bird rising from ashes, reborn and powerful. It wasn't just a symbol of my transformation or the resurrection of careers Darren had tried to destroy. It was a promise to everyone who'd been told they were worth less, who'd been cornered by someone else's greed or lust or cruelty. Sometimes the best revenge isn't just success. Sometimes it's building something from the ashes that ensures no one else has to burn. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Your own experiences and perspectives make these stories come alive.